All right, so here in this prompt, we're talking about how much did sectional debates over slavery contribute to change in America between 1787 and 1860. So this prompt is focusing on change, although you can also identify continuity as well. So this timeline I set up, 1787 all the way to 1860. And so I wanted to find events that would be relevant to sectional debates over slavery. So when you're doing this, you should think about 7 to 10 events or thereabouts to get a good sample of events that you could probably choose from to figure out whether there's continuity or change. So continuity is things that kind of stay the same through the time period. Change would be obviously how things are different. So I started off with the Northwest Ordinance because this is the first regulation of slavery and it outlawed slavery in the Northwest Territory. This is under the Articles of Confederation. So this is from the very beginning of the country. There was obviously a debate over slavery, and there was agreement by the Congress under the Articles of Confederation to have no slavery in the Northwest Territories, which is in the Ohio River Valley. I also included the cotton gin here because the cotton gin is really crucial because this really increased the demand for slave labor. Slavery was existing in the South before the cotton gin, but wasn't nearly as profitable, and it was sort of on its way out. And with the cotton gin, it really brought slavery back pretty strongly, so that because now you could process more cotton, and so you would need more labor. In this case, it was slaves to harvest the cotton. And then we have kind of a lull here where slavery was not really addressed in any meaningful way. But part of that is because a Congress would ban the slave trade in 1808. This actually goes back to the Constitution written way back here, and they said at the Constitutional Convention that slavery wouldn't be touched by Congress for 20 years. So we have this 20-year period where nothing really happens by law about slavery. So Congress bans the importation of slaves in 1808. Then again, we have kind of another lull here where there isn't too much happening with slavery in terms of laws and that sort of thing. We have the Missouri Compromise in 1820, which kept the balance between free and slave states. And this happens during the era of good feelings. So this idea of compromise and keeping the country strong was more kind of where the country was at. So this is to eliminate tension. This is Henry Clay, right, the nationalist who wants to keep the country together. But starting around 1830 here, we have the Second Great Awakening is happening around this time. We have the American Anti-Slavery Society is founded by William Lloyd Garrison, who's a radical abolitionist. This is somebody who's not interested in compromise. He wants slavery to end immediately. And so with the Anti-Slavery Society, you have people that are starting to move strongly to one side on the abolitionist side in the North. And so we're going to start to see splits here between Northerners and Southerners over the morality of slavery. So it's important to remember this is happening at the time of the Second Great Awakening. So then between 1831 and 1846, it's about a 15-year period, we have the Wilmot Proviso. And this is a proposal during the Mexican War to ban slavery on any potential land that the United States would get from Mexico. This ultimately failed, but again, this kind of shows how unwilling people were to compromise a little bit here, right? Because this is during the war. There's been no agreement signed, no treaty signed or anything like that. So the United States hasn't actually gotten any land. This is kind of a just in case. This is the abolitionists kind of preparing for the addition of territory. Because remember, every time the United States adds territory, you have to ask the question, is that territory going to be free or slave? And so the Wilmot Proviso was saying anything that the United States gets from Mexico will not be allowed to have slavery. And of course, Southerners would be upset about that, right? So at the end of the war, when the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, this ended the Mexican War. The United States gets California and New Mexico, so they're expanding west. So this question about whether this becomes slave territory or free territory is back on the table because the Wilmot Proviso failed. But clearly, the abolitionists were getting ready for a fight here. So by the time the Compromise of 1850 occurs, this is kind of Henry Clay and some others. The compromise here, which is not really a true compromise because they split it up into different parts. So each part was voted on independently, not like the Missouri Compromise, where all the Missouri is a free state, Missouri is a slave state, Maine is a free state, and no slavery north of the 3630 line. That was all agreed on at once, one vote in Congress. Here, you have several different votes. One vote allowing California as a free state that benefits the North, and another vote on the strong fugitive slave law, which benefits the South. And this strong fugitive slave law made it possible for people to go into the North and find escaped slaves and bring them back to the South. So Northerners like William Lloyd Garrison, who opposed slavery for moral reasons, saw the strong fugitive slave law as bringing the Northerners into slavery and making them sort of responsible for it. So this is not really a true compromise, even though each side gets something. It's not really an agreement. It's kind of like a separate set of agreements. And so after the Compromise of 1850, things start to get really tense. You have the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin, which kind of like really persuaded Northerners how bad slavery was, and the book was actually banned in the South. You have violence happening in Kansas with Bleeding Kansas after the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So in the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the idea was popular sovereignty, letting the people in the territory decide whether to have slavery, not any kind of congressional compromise, but let the people who live there decide. Well, this ultimately failed because you have this kind of mini civil war within Kansas over who controls Kansas, pro-slavery or anti-slavery people. So we see violence there. And then we get to the election of 1860, where Lincoln wins with essentially no Southern support. So by this point, the United States is split, and South Carolina will secede a month or so after the election here. So when you look at all this change here, one of the things that changes between 1787 and 1860 is the Wilmot Proviso kind of, I think, is a turning point here because it marks this aggressive attempt to ban slavery because the war wasn't over yet. So this is kind of a just in case. So the abolitionists are really getting their arguments together ahead of time to prevent the expansion of slavery. And also, I think the American Anti-Slavery Society represents another turning point too, because the Wilmot Proviso is in politics and government. This American Anti-Slavery Society is really about society and kind of culture, like the morality of slavery. So at this point in the Second Great Awakening, really kind of make slavery a moral issue, whereas before it was kind of a political issue. So I think this can represent a turning point as well, kind of an event that marks a change. As for continuity, you see the government kind of stepping in to kind of, make things okay through laws with the Missouri Compromise, Compromise of 1850, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Ultimately, all three of these end up failing to keep the country together in a unified way and solve the problem of slavery. So these are all kind of temporary solutions. Some, like the Missouri Compromise, last a long time, 30 years. But the Compromise of 1850 lasts barely 10. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act lasts even less than that. So you can see that Congress is attempting to solve the issue, but not doing a great job at it. So the idea is when you look at the timeline, you look for things that is going to stay the same through the time frame, and also look for turning points where things kind of shifted from one perspective to another, like we see with morality here and with that morality moving into Congress.